everyone here that if you haven't, go ahead and sign in outside.
Jennifer's going to sit right here. I need her to be like, we'll have to escort her. We'll have to have look at her going in the third row. She signs us all up for this and then sits on the third row.
Hey, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started now so that we're on time. Hello, folks. Okay.
Is it working?
Let's see if that. Hello? There we go. That's better. Once again, if you haven't signed in up front outside, please do so. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Shane Peterson. I'm the moderator for this session on Project Delivery Cliff Notes. And if you have any complaints about the way the session is run at the end, my name is Matt Jones. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. I'm going to turn it over to Claudia now.
I had these delusions of nobody wanting to be here this morning. Guess I was wrong. We still got folks funneling in, but I want to say good morning to everybody. Hopefully you're all well caffeinated. We've got our Cliff's Notes delivery or presentation on project delivery. Can't hear. Do I need to be closer? Is this one on?
It's on.
All right. Is that better? Okay. Not really. What do we got? How about now? Yes? No? Maybe? I can kind of hear myself. All right. Okay. With our folks are funneling in this morning, here we go. Like we heard from Derek yesterday, we're going to show the PDN, a little bit of PDA today in our Project Delivery Cliff's Notes presentation. I'm Claudia. Here next to me, we have Katrina Feltis, Heather Lane, Brian Gackstetter, and Matt Jones. We're each going to go through each of the phases and kind of give you a little bit of a background. Like we heard yesterday, the PDN is a guide. It's there for reference. Not everything will apply to every project, but any of it could apply to any project. Today's presentation, we're not going to go through every page of DOT's War and Peace, but we will highlight each of the main deliverables that you should expect and expect to produce during each stage. We'll also go through some of our major pitfalls and stuff to avoid, stuff to watch out for. We'll realize that rail coordination has been a challenge, so Brian's going to jump in at the end of each stage with some information about rail coordination and how that works in each stage of the process. First up, stage one. For most of us in the room, I think the majority of this stage happens behind the curtain, and we're accustomed to seeing this gigantic Skittles-looking chart, but I'm actually going to talk to this. We're going to go over a little bit about what happens in general, but not in too much detail. So, first things first, we start with long-range planning off to the left. Our metropolitan and rural planning organizations develop ideas for these projects and based on their community's needs. These projects will be analyzed, defined, an idea gets put forward into our express design. Feasibility Studies Group goes over that project, develops alternatives, looks at what options there might be to achieve that MPO, RPO vision. From there, the project, if it's a STIP project, will go through prioritization, and presumably it'll make it onto the STIP. If it's not a STIP project, we'd go a little bit more towards scoping report, leading you to a kickoff of the project. The eventual goal of stage 1, though, is to complete an express design and a project scoping report. Those two documents will inform the scope that you'll develop, and it'll allow you to issue the notice to proceed, which is the ultimate goal of stage 1. The point of the express design and the project scoping reports gather general information and try out alternatives. They discover any fatal flaws. This information gathering, though, is an ongoing process throughout the entire 4 stages. So you'll see that theme pop up back over and over again throughout each stage. The work that's done together to put these two documents together are useful for project managers. There's no sense in really reinventing the wheel or trying to dig up additional information that's covered. So what can you find here? You should expect to find things like alternatives, geospatial data, cost estimates, hydraulic needs, environmental constraints. All this stuff can help guide you towards topics that need to be covered in the scope. And I feel like sometimes we start on a blank slate with our Connect sites, but it's important to remember that work has been done in stage 1 by the time most project managers get project that prepares for the project. Feasibility studies page on the Connect site is your friend. Use the information that's been gathered there already. So our objectives. Your project scoping report and express design are finished, but what do you need to do to get to NTP? You've reviewed the feasibility site. You've, based on what you find there, you assess any additional needs you might have. You're always thinking about what else there might be, what's been forgotten. Again, as a guide, you can follow the PDN to see what you might need as part of the project. And I've highlighted here, engage the project team. Identify your key team members. And you often hear about involving people early. This is it. This is the time. So once you've got everybody's involvement, we can move to that MTP. Everybody gets together to establish goals and activities. In fact, I was recently included in a project scoping meeting where we talked through some of the scope generator tool. Folks were able to say, everybody was invited and everybody was able to say what was expected, what needed to be included in the scope, and walking through that scope generator, even though it's got a few hiccups right now, we were able to have the opportunity to review each of the needs in each phase by each discipline. We could discuss risks and milestones, coordinate order of operations if that needed to happen. The end result of that meeting was a scope that could lead to an NTP, since that is the goal of stage 1. If you'll think back several slides, I underlay engage the project team. A scoping meeting is one form of that engagement. Don't forget, we also have to think about outside stakeholders as part of this process. There are tools available like the commitment tracker, which is underway, that can remind you about other things that the scope needs to include. You can't work alone. You have to talk with outside groups. It's necessary. It's often required. That might mean coordination with local governments or perhaps even private entities, but it's important to think about who might be interested in your project and reach out to them to discuss what they might need to know or want to know. There's only a few main deliverables for stage 1, but they'll set you up to succeed. You need to identify your express design, your scoping report, and then use those to formulate a scope leading to your notice to proceed. Nice and easy, right? So what can we do to avoid disaster like this poor kitchen? Coordination, communication is always going to be important throughout every stage of the process. Identify your stakeholders. Talk with them about the things you're expecting. Avoid developing a scope that doesn't solve the problem. One that has an unreasonable schedule would be less than ideal. Have a questioning attitude in stage 1. Relay your findings to your team, and if you as the project manager don't keep your team informed, you're setting yourself up to fall on your face like this guy. Brian's going to give you a few things to think about for rail coordination.
First things off, engage Rail Division early on. We have a service account email. It's railroad.coordination@ncdot.gov. Next thing you need to look at, are the impacts truly necessary? Railroad impacts can be like the tunnel to the right. That could be a clear path out, or it could be a train coming at you at the other end. What are the alternatives? Can the proposed work stay out of the, hold on. All right. So what are the alternatives? Can the proposed work completely stay out of the railroad right-of-way? Can it be at least minimized? Let's work with the railroad to figure out what the alternatives are for the particular project. Start the coordination early. Treat the railroad as a stakeholder. They're not an obstacle. If there's going to be impacts, you need to work with them. Present them with all the alternatives for everything that's being proposed for officially sign off on a selected alternative. That is one thing that they have stressed to us recently, is that we've come to them with one alternative and that is it. They want to see everything else before they sign off. And I'll get into the reasons why that's valid later on. All the costs, risks associated with the impact with the railroad need to be included in the estimate and the schedule. For example, if there's a functional design that shows a bridge highway over, and the design team comes back and says, well, let's look at a railroad bridge. There's costs and risk associated with that. So we need to look at that as a part of the overall process. That can be more expensive. It could cause a lot of delays, especially for design build projects. So you need to be aware of that. So up next is Heather Lane with Project Development Engineer, Division 2.
Thank you, Brian. So, welcome to Stage 2, Alignment Defined. So after NTP, you enter Stage 2. This stage has a lot of activities and tasks, as well as coordination and deliverables. And if you look at the slide snapshot of the PDN, you'll see a lot of information that can be overwhelming. And again, this is a tool, not a thou shalt. The key to focus on this snapshot is it's showing you where you came from and where you're going. You've just completed NTP, and now you're entering into Phase 2 to start your key design elements. Your main objective, excuse me, your main objective is to get your environmental document and to conduct your field inspection meeting. Virtually every other deliverable and every other objective in this stage is to get to these two. The key is to focus on the things that your project needs. Is this a merger project? Is it federally funded? Does it have a rail crossing? Those are just a few of the questions you're going to be working through in this process. These questions should have been discussed earlier during your project scoping and kickoff. Remember, the type of document you have may have certain outreach requirements. A good resource to help with this determination is the statewide public involvement plan, which can be found online. Key deliverables. There are a lot of deliverables in this phase, but they're not all up here. We're just going to focus on a few of the main or common ones across all projects. You're going to develop right-of-way, utility, and construction estimates. You're going to develop your design recommendation plan set, which sets your horizontal and vertical alignment. You're going to determine your utility routing. You're going to produce your environmental document. And as you'll see here on the screen, you see all the different types of documents. But I would encourage you guys to go to the Environmental Policy Unit's website for more information. There was actually a recent lunch and learn in April that was extremely helpful for orienting folks on environmental documents, and that can be found on the CLEAR Program's website, so highly recommend that. And lastly, you'll see here the field inspection plan set, which incorporates various disciplines into one plan set. And as you'll see here on the screen, Christmas lights. That's what I feel a lot of what project management and delivering projects are, is you've got that big tangle of Christmas lights, and you need to untangle it, and you need to figure out what works and what doesn't, and unstring those different issues as they pop up. It's problem solving. So next we have primary coordination efforts. So there is significant coordination that occurs in this stage. And then you'll see here, I've just got a few of the folks that you'll coordinate with, not all of them, and you may not coordinate with some of these folks, but this is just to give you a general idea of just some of the organizations you may have to coordinate on your project. For example, if you're trying to determine if you can do an on or off-site detour, you need to reach out to your local officials, your permitting agencies, your division staff, and so forth. Another example is complete streets. You need to complete the complete streets review assessment. You require feedback from your MPOs and RPOs. Oftentimes, deliverables are interlaced. Again, Christmas lights, you've got to untangle it. But the key to remember is use your subject matter experts. We've got a lot of folks who have a lot of knowledge, and they can help point you in the right direction. And again, early coordination is key. So I encourage you to set up those times with those folks to get that feedback. You know, if you have high-risk items, set up those monthly or quarterly meetings to get that feedback, and you'll get ahead of these issues. It's also worth noting that coordination can drive the need for deliverables. You know, for example, hardships. You're reaching out to the public and all these different organizations. They'll bring to light things that you were not aware of. This is excellent knowledge that's going to help you produce the best plans and the best project. And again, in this stage, right-of-way advanced acquisitions should be occurring if needed. So some common pitfalls to avoid. Talk to people and solicit buy-in. Things change, especially with DOT. We've all been subject to multiple changes and different philosophies and so forth, and we have to adapt. Communication will help address these changes. As I mentioned earlier, we coordinate with a lot of groups. There's often staff changeover. Make sure decision makers are the same, and if not, get them up to speed. We've had occasions where local officials have changed out, and the new folks have had different opinions on projects than their predecessors. You need to consider these things as you're looking at projects, you're turning projects back online. Another way of communicating is updating your project website if you have one. If your project has frequent questions or hot topics on your project, consider putting an FAQ section on your website. Look at those tools that you can utilize. And next is local feedback. Use the local knowledge of your divisions. Ask for help or their guidance. They want to help you. Take advantage of this. And then next is feedback from construction and maintenance. If you're not sure if a temporary construction easement is sufficient, reach out. If you're proposing several retaining walls on a project to reduce impacts, reach out. Ask those questions to the folks. Flush these topics to the surface. And lastly, be aware of scope creep. Remember what your purpose and need is. What is your project addressing? Has it been addressed? Everything you add on to your project can affect your delivery. So some key takeaways, important things to consider. Bang for your buck. Bring all your plan sets, even your preliminary information such as utility routing, to your field inspection meeting. This means that you will have more meaningful comments that can be discussed early and prevent delays and additional expense. Also bring the right people. Include right-of-way staff as well. This is a great opportunity to discuss special considerations. This won't be the first time you've engaged right-of-way, but it's a great touch point. I've also had several occasions in field inspections where traffic management plans flushed out design flaws. Again, is it buildable? We reviewed utility plans that didn't have sufficient easements or appropriate separation. Without these plans at the field inspection meetings, a lot of these issues will not come up or get addressed until the project gets let, and those things can be costly and time-consuming. And as Boyd said yesterday, we need to emphasize constructability, and we need to bridge the gap between pre-construction and construction. And again, keep your schedule updated and monitor your budget. Has your deliverable dates changed? Are there significant delays? Make the necessary adjustments. Monitor the risk on your project. Look for opportunities to bring new things to light. Coordination with stakeholders in your divisions will help with this. There's always going to be a hurdle or a crisis. Adapt. Conduct constructability reviews when appropriate. This can help save time, money, and help further develop or fine-tune plans, or even help choose an alternative and so forth. Next is coordination takes time, as I spoke to you earlier. And as you see on this comic on the screen, Rome wasn't built in a day. You're not going to deliver a project in a day. And if you can, please let me know. But as you've heard Brian and Claudia talk about coordination, and you've heard yesterday about communication, the same topics keep coming up throughout today's presentation and the presentations yesterday. Start your coordination early. Communicate with others. Ask those questions during your scoping meetings, and ask those subject matter experts for their opinions on your schedule and your deliverables. And in summary, again, ask questions. Bring as many people with you through this process as you possibly can. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Brian to talk about rail coordination and best practices.
All right. Rail coordination can sometimes look like this yard track. It is a lot of different paths, can take you in a bunch of different directions. So that's the way it can look like. So, coordinate, as previously mentioned, be sure that projects conform to the latest railroad requirements. These are constantly changing. They're always updating their public projects manual. So you need to make sure that you're up to date on those current standards. As far as reviews, the initial reviews are taking up to 90 days. Initially, within the past year, it was 60, but we're running at 90 days, if not longer, on initial reviews for projects. So y'all need to take that in consideration when you're scheduling these inspections and plan reviews and things like that. That's a huge factor. And it's not just NCDOT workload. This is workload that they have to take on through the entire network. A lot of these railroads, class ones, is 24, 26 states. And each of these project firms have 4 to 5 states that they have to manage. They love North Carolina because we're streamlined, but there's other states that they have to spend a lot of time in. So those are the factors that come into play when they look at these reviews. Subsequent reviews are taken 45 to 60 days afterwards. So take that in consideration. You're not going to get through in one review. You're not going to get on 2, maybe 3, but take that in consideration when you're developing your schedules. Something else that's come up recently is called Norfolk Southern re-reviews. This is something that's kind of hit us on a few projects at the last minute that we weren't aware of. So we're making you aware of this. CSX hasn't brought this to us yet, but Norfolk Southern has. What this means is that if a project is not under agreement within 18 months of the plans being stamped satisfactory by NS, they will make you go through a re-review process of those plans. That takes, again, 90 days because they have to go through the complete process of their internal review process, and that takes the initial 90 days. Take that in consideration. So that's one of the reasons why we're trying to get this stuff early on and keep things moving along so that we don't have to go through this process again. Standard deviations. Each railroad has minimum requirements that they require depending upon the impact, whether it's an at-grade crossing or it's a grade separation, whether under or over. So what is a standard deviation? As I talked before, what are the alternatives? So making sure that all the alternatives have been exhausted and you've tried your best and this is the best design that we can come up with for this particular location and it doesn't meet the railroad standards, we look at doing a standard deviation. It is a letter that is written by the department to the railroad with solid engineering background that cannot be based solely on cost, cannot be solely based on real estate. It's got to be solid engineering backup. It could be for example, a wetland. If the minimum standards were, if the project already is missing a wetland, and we come back later and say we need this minimum standard, or this minimum standard is not going to impact the wetland because the bridge is going to get longer and wider to accommodate spread and all that. We need that's part of that engineering backup. So that is one successful project that we have gotten on through the standard deviation process down in Union County. So that is something that we need to be aware of. And with that, I will turn it over to Matt Jones for plan in hand.
Thanks, Brian. We're going to look at stage 3 now and move into that. And to look here, I wanted to put the PDN chart up, not as a guide as we've heard yesterday and throughout today, but mainly just an idea to see what's occurring in stage 3, what occurred before, what we're moving toward. You can see there's a lot of things going on there. We're not going to dig into all this. Obviously, this is the Cliff's Notes, not the novel. If you want the novel, you're going to want to come to the project management training that you've heard about yesterday from Sean and Jennifer. But as you look at stage 3, you're going to be looking at finalizing your major design tasks. That's going to be occurring throughout. And each project, as you've heard, depends on the level of the project, the complexity, the scope, is going to determine how much of this is used. So let the project drive the process, not the PDN. We're going to be authorizing right-of-way funds during this phase, and you're likely to begin some early acquisition process. You're going to be looking at utility coordination. It's going to be ongoing. You're going to be finalizing minor utility conflicts. Hopefully a lot of that's occurred in stage 2, as Heather talked about. But you're going to still be working with those utility owners to work through that and their schedules. And your utility relocation is likely to begin as well. And then another big topic of this is the environmental permitting. You want to be working on finalizing those permit applications so that you can get the permits in hand earlier than later. And again, we're just going to hit the highlights here and walk through this. And so as we talk about these objectives, what are the key deliverables that are going to come out of this? We're looking at the environmental permit application. How are you going to finalize that and receive your permits? If your document has been signed more than a year ago as you move into that right-of-way phase, you're going to need to think about a consultation for whatever kind of document that is. Any kind is going to require a consultation. Think about your agreements. These are needed for let and funding authorization in most cases. So think about your municipal utility, and Brian's going to talk about the rail agreements in more detail. But those municipal agreements are going to dictate who may have some cost responsibility for a specific item or maintenance responsibilities moving forward. And your utility is going to determine who may be paying for that relocation. Obviously, the big topic of this is right-of-way plans. We need to finalize those plans, make sure they're complete and ready to go for right-of-way acquisitions. And then you're going to authorize the funding. And as we said, this is just some of the key deliverables. Not every project has them, but then others may have other things you need to think about. I've noted there the Geoenvironmental Phase 2 and Design Noise Report. Your geoenvironmental may dictate how you're going to acquire some of those parcels. So make sure you've got that complete and ready to go as you go into right-of-way. The Design Noise Report, you may need some additional right-of-way for a wall or an easement to construct the wall. So make sure you've got those items in hand if you think it's going to be necessary. And I've noted here the construction estimate, the 13-month let list is going to be called a lot of things, but essentially you need that construction estimate updated before it goes on the 12-month let list. So be thinking about that. That may play into your schedule, just depending on how your milestones are playing out for your particular project. But keep an eye on that so you don't get caught at the end trying to update quantities. And as we think about delivery and deliverables, we don't get them the next day, the next hour with the touch of a button. A lot of work, a lot of teamwork. There's a lot of people involved in these deliverables. So work together. It's an uphill battle in most cases. It doesn't feel easy, but there is a summit that we can all strive for. So we just got to work together on those deliverables. So as we look at those, what are our primary coordination efforts going to be? We're going to touch on 4, the environmental document consultation, permitting, utility coordination, and the right-of-way acquisition process. And you may think, well, what could really go wrong? Well, there quite a few things, as many of you probably know, but we'll talk about some of those pitfalls and things to try to avoid. We'll start with the consultation for your environmental document. The first thing you need to be looking at, does your design still align with the original study area and the surveys and studies that were done? It's not uncommon for a design to change. You may find an intersection that needs improvement. Did that get caught in the study area? Did things change since you started? Those can delay things if you don't catch it early as you're trying to catch those studies back up, and they do take time. Have the impacts changed? Did you assume no impacts to a property where now you have them? Could lead to community impact issues, environmental justice issues, a lot of things that go into that we need to be considering as we look at that. Could have a historic effect on the historic architecture, archaeology. So be looking at those issues as you go into, double, triple check your study areas with your design. As you look back at that, have the surveys, studies expired, or are there new or changing regulations? For instance, threatened endangered species is a hot topic right now. New bat species, none of us want to talk about, but they're there. And so how are we going to deal with that? Those surveys expire. Even the ones that have been around for years, those can expire. So be looking ahead at when these consultations may be needed. There's times of the year you've got to do all those surveys. If you miss that window, you've delayed yourself potentially 6 months or more, just depending on how that plays out with the survey windows. So look ahead, make sure you're staying on top of those things so that you don't get behind the 8 ball when it comes time to do the consultations and thereby delaying any kind of funding authorization. Now we'll touch a little bit on permitting. I'm not going to claim to be a permitting expert, but you will hear from some other folks that if you're interested in permitting, there's a session later today about utilities and permitting, so that might be of interest to some of you. But as you start talking about permitting and thinking about that, do you know all the impacts? It's easy to think about hydro, roadway, structures, but have you thought about utility relocations? Is it going to impact a wetland or a stream that you need to account for? Do your erosion control plans align with your permit drawings? Make sure you've looked at all those things as you start looking at applying for permits. It could lead to permit revisions or mods, which just lead to time down the road and more work for the agencies, but it also could delay your overall permit submittal. So look at those things as you're thinking about this. Think about, are you using a nationwide or an individual permit? That's going to change your review times with the agencies, what they're going to require from you, and how much time it's going to take to get those permits completed. When you think about an individual permit, the Corps is going to want to see some level of an alternatives analysis. Have you looked at those alternatives to see what impacts you have with each one? They're going to want to look at those things. And as you think about back to what Heather said, and as you think through this, do you have agency buy-in? Talk to them early, have communication, develop those relationships, talk to your partners in Raleigh that have those relationships if you don't. They're great at talking to the agencies early, determining what kind of permit we can use. Are they going to agree with what we're doing? Because ultimately they're going to issue you the permit. So we've got to have those communications. Give you a quick example. In our division, we had a project that started out with a assumption of a nationwide based on permit thresholds. Well, lo and behold, nationwide thresholds changed from linear foot to acreage. That tripped us into an individual permit. Now we're going back through alternatives, trying to compare those alternatives to show the impacts, reduce those. Some of you may have dealt with this issue with a 2-lane median divided typical section. The agencies don't like those at crossings if you can't justify that median. So we ended up having to go back, coordinate routinely with the Corps, do some design revisions to reduce that typical section at the crossing. So just a lot of things can occur throughout a project. So communicate often with those agencies and make sure they're on board with what you're doing. Our next topic we'll move into is the utility coordination and relocation. Obviously, a lot of time goes into the utility coordination piece of this. Similar to permitting, do you have all the conflicts resolved for the utility relocations? It's easy for us, again, to look at the structure and hydro and things like that, but have you thought about a signal plan? What kind of poles you're using at a signal location? Where's Duke relocating at that intersection? If you're using mast arms, strain poles, there's different installation methods and clearance requirements that are going to be required. So make sure Duke has those and that y'all have looked at that to make sure that they are out of the way of those. Traffic management, is there a utility relocation that's going to require a deep excavation? Are we taking that into account if it's within the project duration? And is there a phase that we need to account for with a road crossing? So a lot of things to think about there. And as you start looking at developing those utility agreements, make sure we've got the prior rights documentation. Those of you may not know, that's where they prove that they were either there before us or we were there before them. That's going to dictate who's responsible for paying for that utility relocation, or potentially who's going to acquire a necessary easement or the right-of-way for that relocation. So make sure you've got those prior rights and that you have reviewed them. There's times they provide a lot of stuff, but it doesn't say anything. It's just a lot of documentation. So look at that and make sure you agree before you enter into those utility agreements. And then not only comparing the overall design to the utilities, but have you compared the wet and the dry utilities? We've seen plans come in where you may have your dry utilities, your wet utilities, and when you overlay them, there's impacts, there's conflicts. Make sure we're looking at those as we finalize those utility plans, because you have different designers developing those. So if we're not comparing those, we may run into an issue. And I say there, can they be right-sized? You know, we're not designing the utilities for Duke and these other dry utility owners. But when you get those, look at them and determine, are they asking for too much? Can we reduce that? Are they taking a gas station canopy where we could easily modify it a couple of feet and avoid a major relocation? So look at those things. Don't just accept what they give you. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions of the utility owners. They may tell you no, but it's worth asking to reduce those impacts down the road. Ultimately, those things can easily lead into right-of-way revisions, or Z-takes as we call them. If you don't know what that is, you don't want to know. It's where you go back to the property owner for a second time after you've settled one claim. They don't like us the first time. They really don't like you the second time. So you just avoid that if at all possible. And if you don't catch it during the design and right-of-way phase, you're looking at potential construction revisions. And anybody that's been in construction knows supplementals and claims. Expensive for time and money, and they don't end well for DOT. So avoid those. Try to catch it early. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but we need to do our due diligence. And overall, look at the utility relocation timeline. How is that going to fit into the overall schedule? When do you let? When do they need to start moving? Now, again, back to the bats. A lot of moratoria across the state now. Some of us are dealing with it that never have before. When can we cut trees? When can we not? Well, we got to cut trees for Duke. If that delays them 6-8 months, we've delayed a let potentially 6 or 8 months or more. So we really need to be thinking about that in addition to the permitting. I mentioned permits before and making sure it accounts for utility relocations. We need to make sure we have those permits in hand before the utilities get started if they are affecting our permit. So keep that in mind. And now our probably most favorite thing of all, right-of-way. I say here, hit the ground running. What do I mean? Let's try your best as you get started into right-of-way. Talk to your right-of-way firms before you authorize funds. As you're finalizing right-of-way plans, engage them early. Start talking about scoping that, get a fee in place so that once you get those funds authorized, they can start. As you all know, it can take several months to get a contract in place. So if we can have that ready, have it started, always supplement it later for more parcels, but at least they can start. You don't want to waste time. The first thing you want to do is identify your utility parcels. Sit down with the plans, the utility plans, the relocation plans, identify every parcel that might be needed for a utility. Give those as a priority to those agents so they can attack those parcels early, and that way your utility relocations can get started earlier. And remember, it's not just an easement for a utility that might be needed, so look for right-of-way that they may be using as well. They may be encroaching on our right-of-way. So it takes a little time, but it certainly helps those agents go out and prioritize their work. And as you think about your rural and suburban areas, you're going to be thinking about septic and well issues. Are there public utilities available? If there are, you could still have a septic system in place that somebody's using. So make sure you're looking for those early and identifying those parcels. And remember, it's not just the septic system. It could be the repair area that you're impacting that could lead to a total take of that parcel. And as you're looking at it, talk to your county health department. Some will accept private assessments, some will not. If they do, it usually will save you time if you can get your firm to utilize a private company. There is still a review time for the county to review those, but it typically does speed things along. So talk to them early and make sure that will work for your project. As you're finalizing right-of-way plans, your field inspection meetings, make sure you're looking at access issues. Whether that's a random gravel, dirt, grass drive in the middle of nowhere that we've accidentally put a guardrail across that we didn't see in a survey file, that leads to issues down the road. Did we miss a curb cut in a curb and gutter section? Was there an undeveloped parcel that we might have accidentally overlooked? As you look at those and talk to your agents ahead of time and let them know that, if they see those issues, bring it back to the designer's attention. It might be something that could be corrected. It might have just been an oversight, but if they overlook it, we overlook it, an appraisal may look at it and say it's a total take. So we just need to be aware of those issues and review those as we see them. And along with that, you've got potential utility easements and right-of-ways. Now thinking about a Duke transmission, a cross-country pipeline, sewer outfalls, they have access concerns as well. So make sure we don't cut them off. Again, can lead to costly repairs down the road that our maintenance folks may have to go back in and alter a guardrail or a ditch. So if that gets overlooked, it can lead to issues. And, as you think about the right-of-way process as public servants, we need to be willing to meet and discuss our plans and impacts with our property owners and business owners. I know it takes a lot of time. It does eat up a lot of time to meet and talk. But just remember, oftentimes they're only talking to a right-of-way agent, not the designer. You guys and us as project managers, we know the reason behind what we're doing. We can explain it, and we can make them feel comfortable with why we're doing it. The agents may not make them feel comfortable. They know what they're doing, and we have an idea on our side as far as design, but, it does go a long way. You might be able to make a simple modification to a plan, driveway revision. Let's alter a ditch, maybe put a pipe in. A lot of things that you could do to maybe settle a claim that's simple. So talk to those owners and be willing to negotiate with them with designs that don't compromise the safety of the public or the overall project design. Those things can go a long way. And, as you get into this, ultimately, there's going to be right-of-way relocations on a project. So make sure you're monitoring the timelines needed for that. There's vacate dates. There's uniform timelines that have to be given. But just make sure the agents are monitoring that and staying on top of that as things progress. They can quickly escalate, delay things, lead to the other dirty word evictions that are legal issues, public relations nightmares. They don't go well. So we want to avoid those, but they do happen. And once you do get the people out, you then have demolitions to contend with. Asbestos assessments, abatement, takes time, then the demo process. So again, how do we monitor this? It's best have right-of-way status meetings routinely, whether that's monthly, bi-weekly, depending on the project. It's going to depend on how extensive of a right-of-way project you may have. But it's best to have those meetings. You get the team in one place. The designers, the agents, the project manager, everybody can get together, talk through the issues as they come up. It's great for accountability. You know if things are getting accomplished each month or each meeting, things don't linger. And how are we going to track the progress? You can use the B reports, or now the online SharePoint tool, I guess, as most of us are maybe becoming more familiar with. Or you might want a GIS map. A lot of folks are starting to use GIS mapping to see each parcel as they move through the status of right-of-way. So that's a great way if you're trying to determine as utilities become available to relocate. And through all this, whether it be utilities or right-of-way, we're going to be monitoring overdrafts with the new financial guidance. You get into overdrafts, you're going to delay payments to property owners. They may get frustrated, pull out of an agreement. We can't pay our consultant partners. So, as DOT, we've got to monitor those overdrafts and make sure we're looking at the overall budget. So what do we need to take away from all this? Well, you've heard it from us. You've heard it yesterday. Coordination, teamwork, communication. One person doesn't do all this. There's a lot of teams involved, whether it be the designers, the project manager, DOT units, utility owners, our municipal partners. A lot of folks that we need to be communicating with so they're aware of our schedule, where we stand on the project. if we're not talking to them, the utility owner may not know when we're going to be ready. So just keep them aware. A lot of coordination is required throughout the entire process. Don't be afraid to think outside the box, or as I say here, plagiarize. Share ideas across the divisions. Every division may have different issues they've addressed, and it may help you. You heard yesterday, we're starting to investigate it now. Tree clearing for the utilities ahead of time. Look at that. That may help you. It does lead to other potential issues and things you need to think about, but there's a lot of things going on across the state, and we shouldn't be afraid to share ideas with each other, whether that be with our subject matter experts in Raleigh. Our consultant partners may have ideas on other projects, so we really need to be talking about that. And as I say here, right-of-way revisions aren't always the enemy. They can help settle things, so don't be afraid to look at those if they make sense. Try to avoid them if it's something we just are trying to get through the right-of-way phase, but if it helps things, don't be afraid of those. And you think about it throughout, but design with the end in mind. Look at the big picture, not only for right-of-way and utilities, but you heard constructability. You heard yesterday Drew talking about maintenance responsibilities down the road. If we design and build something that's just awful for maintenance, what are we going to do? The maintenance budgets are not there to correct issues. So just be looking at the big pictures. We're reviewing plans, designing the projects, and getting things ready. And again, throughout all this, just remember, time's valuable. You lose time in the project development process, it's hard to make up. Me and Brian were talking before, you're dealing with railroad owners. We have no control over their schedules. Utility owners, we can't control their schedules. We joke around, it's like pushing a rope a lot of times with these schedules, but that's why it's important not to lose time on small issues. Keep things moving and don't let things linger. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Brian to talk about the rail coordination.
All right, stage 3 rail coordination. First step off is easement sketches. With this is drainage structures and at-grade crossings. These are legal documents that are either documents and plats that are generated by location and surveys with the assistance of project managers and project consultants. What these are identify as temporary easements for construction, permanent easements, whether it's an at-grade crossing or a grade separation that has interior bents, and aerial easements for overhead grade separations. These are not shown on the plans, so that's still the same way as we've always done in the past. These are just completely separate documents that are recorded by the railroad. This concurs basically once all plan comments have been addressed, so typically shortly thereafter the project agreement has been developed and underway. Next thing to talk about is permits in general. There's drainage permits, wet utilities, and dry utilities. For CSX, drainage permits have been a thing. NS has not really been pushing them, but CSX has. It's where you actually have storm drainage is being permitted by the railroad. So they want to see a separate set of drawings that looks at that with those requirements. So you need to have a discussion on who's doing what. Like I said, these are additional drawings that have to be developed that meet certain criteria on what they want to see. So these are above and beyond what our normal plans look like. For wet utilities is department permitting needs, or is the municipality or the county. For dry utilities, make sure that the companies are taking care of these. All this takes time. It takes about 4 to 6 months to get through this process alone. So again, that's outside of normal plan development. This is an extra step that we have to go through. So with that, look at the impacts to the railroad corridor again. Does the drainage that we're putting in there need to be there? Can it stop short? Can it stay out completely? Can you come up with a different way of conveying drainage in and around the railroad right away? Project agreements. We say minimum PM effort as long as so that rail and structures management unit is involved. It is ideal to start this process once you obtain substantial comments on your plans, and those have been addressed by the railroad. It helps to ensure that plans do not need to be updated and changes in the railroad standards. And it goes back to the 18 months. So, once you've got the plan comments underway and you've reached minimal comments that these are satisfactory type things, start this plan, start the agreement process. We want to start that early on. We don't want this stuff to drag out and have to go through a re-review process. Typically, these agreements are prepared by the rail division or structures management, depending on what type of project it is and who is managing the project. We've come up with process and procedures with that, so that is something that to keep that in mind of where we are and who's doing what. Initial reviews, I say it's taken between 60 and 75 days now. I will say there are projects that have been painful, and I do mean painful. It's taken almost a year on some, 6 to 8 months on others. Matt's project is one of those projects that have been sacrificed as part of that process. But that does help everything else going forward. And that is the key, is trying to get template agreements in place so that these sail through the review process within the railroad's legal department. When you start entering into agreements that are non-standard, that takes much longer. It can take 6 to 8 months, even longer, depending on what type of provisions are in this agreement. So we tried to develop these template agreements to make everyone's life easy going forward. But again, it's been painful for some. And with that, I will turn it over to Katrina Feltis for stage 4.
All right. Can y'all hear me okay? Yes. Good. I get the last section. Hopefully I don't put you to sleep, because it's an hour and 15 minutes this session, and I want y'all to hear this part. So we're in the home stretch of project delivery, so that's exciting and terrifying all at the same time. The main objective of stage 4, whoop whoop, stage 4, it's pretty important. It's to submit complete and accurate plans, specification, estimates, and other supporting documents to begin assembling the bidding documents. Now, I'm going to stress on complete and accurate. How many of you have gone to the mechanic to get your tires rotated? Ever? Yeah. How important is it to make sure that those lug nuts are tightened? Because if they're not, it could pose a safety hazard, could also jeopardize their reputation. And so in a similar fashion, if we don't have complete and accurate PS&E packages over to contracts, that could jeopardize our schedule. It could cost the department quite a bit of money. It can also hurt our construction partners, and it can have a lot of submittals and claims come to the department, which construction is a lot more expensive than what we can do in design. So we need to make sure that we've got complete and accurate PS&E packages when we submit them over to contracts. So to accomplish that, the project manager leads the project team in finalizing the plans, specifications, and estimates. They also ensure that right-of-way is acquired and all necessary utility relocations are complete. All of this goes into preparing the project for advertisement and ensuring that the contract package is ready for letting. To ensure that the project is going to be successfully let, it is vital for project managers and project team members to do everything that they can to ensure that we have 100% of our plans, right-of-way acquisitions, and utility relocations completed, and all other supporting documentation submitted to contract standards by PS&E, which is 3 months prior to let. This stage requires a lot of communication and coordination to ensure that all of the pieces needed for advertisement and letting are assembled on time. Up to 90% of a project manager's time can be spent coordinating during this stage. So now that we know what we're trying to accomplish, how are we going to get there? We've got the PDN, and I hope you all can read that because we're going to test you on your way out. No, I'm just kidding. There's about 17 activities that are listed in the PDN that we have various subject matter experts working on to help us get there. There can be a lot there to digest and understand, but essentially there's a few main points that we can break it down to. We're finalizing all the plans. We want to make sure that there are no conflicts or fatal flaws. We're working towards relocating all utilities. This ensures that construction is ready to go after letting, and it reduces the delay to the contractor if they're out there. We don't want them starting to work and then running into a delay that costs us money. To avoid utility delays and potential contractor claims, we need to make sure that right-of-way acquisitions and relocations are completed. It helps to prioritize those parcels that need utility relocations. So if you're in stage 4 when you are within 15 months prior to let, the construction estimate will need to be updated. Sometimes this will fall into stage 3 and sometimes it'll fall into stage 4. So just understanding where you're at when you get to that point. An updated construction consultation to your environmental document might be required as well. Those are required to be signed less than 1 year before you you request construction funds, which is about when you get your project on the 12-month let list. Also, finalizing coordination on all your permitting, certifications, and agreements to make sure they are signed prior to your PS&E package being submitted. And lastly, all supporting project documentations need to be finalized and uploaded into your key documents on SharePoint. It's important, this timeline on the bottom of the screen that you see here, it's important to submit the entire PS&E package 3 months prior to letting to allow contract standards time to do what they need to do. There's quite a bit that they end up needing to do. They have to review the plans and the supporting documents so that they can request and secure construction funds, develop the contract time, assemble the proposal, and advertise the contract package. Once the project is let, contractors have a certain time frame in which they can submit bids, and then finally the contract will be awarded. So what do we got to turn in for that PS&E let? That's the important question, right? There will be a session later today that I encourage you all to go to. It's called the Ingredients for a Quality 100% PS&E Package. That's at 1 o'clock in room 6. But I'll go over some of the most common deliverables that we turn in at PS&E. We've got our advertisement documents, which are sign and seal plans, which get uploaded to the Let Prep folder on your pre-construction site. We've got written special provisions to indicate any additions or deletions or modifications to your standard specifications. Most disciplines will have some common special provisions that they use. However, some of them might require some tweaking or new special provisions. So you can work with your subject matter experts to ensure that those fit the needs for your project and are submitted on time. We also have the construction estimate or the engineer's estimate. This is different than those intermittent construction verified cost estimates that we submit. At PS&E time, the project manager is going to submit quantities for the engineering section, the estimate section, to apply estimate or their cost estimates to, and that'll become the confidential engineer's estimate, which they'll use to compare to how the project gets let. That must be held confidential until the project is let. We also have some certifications. These must be signed, and they're needed to ensure construction funding and for that funding to be authorized. These should be stored as key documents, and they consist of right-of-way and utility certs. The project manager should be coordinating with the right-of-way and utility subject matter experts to make sure they're assigned and included into that folder. We also have rail certifications, which Brian mentioned. Those are required on every project. Any project you do needs a rail cert. The project manager can reach out to rail or structures management unit to get that done. These do not apply to design build projects, so Most of our projects are design bid build at this time, but just so you know that. Permits also most of them don't apply to design build projects, but any that you need to have, and especially for all your other projects, you'll have to submit permits in stage 3. At the end of stage 3, you want to submit them. Make sure they're signed on time, are done, and uploaded to key documents on SharePoint. Some of the permits that might be on your project may consist of the 401, the 404 permits, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission or FERC permits, the Coastal Area Management Act or the CAMA permit, the FEMA National Flood Insurance Program permit, or the rail. Also have some agreements. This helps ensure that all utilities, rail, municipality, or any other agreements are signed. If you have any developer agreements that you're working on, it would be helpful to have those as well. Most of those might come during construction, though, and they're not really required for letting. Some other documents consist of the environmental document, construction consultation, the green sheet commitments, which are done in the commitment tracker, but you can print those in a PDF and include that in your permit package. So now we're going to move on to the coordination efforts. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of coordination required across all team members to make sure that we have a complete PS&E package and that it's submitted to contract standards on time. While the project manager is leading the team through most of this coordination, it does take effort from every team member to make sure that this is successful. And by coordination, that's not just sending emails, that's calling, that's doing whatever you can to make sure that whatever is hanging out there gets completed. It's very important that we work together to make sure that this gets finished. So who are we coordinating with? We've got our subject matter experts, our external stakeholders, structures management unit, contract standards listed up on there. But with our subject matter experts, we need to make sure that all team members know the due dates and the expectations of what should be included in that PS&E package and who they need to be coordinating with. Got a lot of subject matter experts out there, and we can't be afraid of those hurdles that come our way. Every project has different hurdles, so don't be afraid to reach out to those subject matter experts. They have a lot of information that we can use to help get over those hurdles. I do want to mention that if you do have a design build project, make sure you're coordinating with them early. We also have our external stakeholders. Some projects have a lot of external stakeholders. Make sure we're talking with them, making sure they understand what the project is, how it impacts them, answering any questions that they have. A lot of times our external stakeholders consist of municipalities, emergency services, local officials, environmental agencies, other state and federal agencies, utility owners, property owners and business owners, as well as developers. We also have the structures management unit. At PS&E turn-in time, structures reviews their any structural related plans while the contract standards is reviewing the rest of the plan set. So it's important to be coordinating with them as well, making sure that they understand what's in the rest of the plans and that everything, there's no conflicts. How y'all doing? You hanging in there with me? All right. I need another do a whoop whoop. Okay. I want to lose you. All right. So we've got contract standards. To me, they're my customer. So I need to make sure they have everything they need. We have to make sure that we're submitting a complete, accurate package to them, that we're addressing any comments and questions that they have as well. For centrally managed projects, we need to make sure we're coordinating with the divisions. They are also my customers, since I'm working at Central. But it's important that we're coordinating with them all the time and making sure that our division construction engineer, resident engineer, our division right-of-way and utility staff are informed and ensuring that their expectations are met, and we identify any communication expectations to help support them on design-related questions that come up during construction. All right. So, what kind of things do we have in place to help us coordinate? All kinds of things. We have Teams now, so we can do meetings anytime. All right. So we've got a design complete review meeting. I'm guessing most of you have never heard of this meeting, but it's in the PM guide, and I had to do some research on it before I got here. This was formerly known as the pre-let field inspection meeting. I've also heard it called the plan in hand meeting. And so typically this happens at the end of stage 3. It's basically a big plan review that we all need to do to make sure there's no conflicts and fatal flaws. So during stage 4, we need to be making sure that we take these comments and we incorporate them into we're addressing all these comments. This is highly recommended for larger, more complex projects. For the 15-month meeting, this is new. I'm excited about a new meeting. This is for centrally let projects only. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this meeting later as we know more about it, but the purpose of this meeting is to make sure we're ensuring projects are ready to be added to the 12-month let list. Project managers should be ready to discuss necessary deliverables to complete prior to PS&E and identify any risk and how they will be addressed or identified, or mitigated, sorry. And then we've got the PS&E meeting. This is highly encouraged because this meeting is to help review and ensure that we have a complete package ready to go. Making sure that all comments have been addressed, any outstanding issues have been mitigated, discussing what is ready to go in the let prep folder, and what action items are still needed to make sure that we're ready. Who is putting in the let prep folder? Who's putting what deliverables in the let prep folder is also important to know. We also have our right-of-way and utility coordination meetings that are often continuing on in this stage. So let's talk briefly about best practices and common pitfalls. So for best practices, project managers can hold a PS&E meeting with all their team members. This is the last chance to make sure that our plans are complete, accurate, and ready for submittals. Maybe 6 to 8 weeks before PS&E turn-in would be a good time frame. Making sure that the project schedules focus on the PS&E date rather than the let date. Ensuring that work zone traffic control plans align with the utility relocation progress and adjacent projects. And when possible, modify the design to avoid second right-of-way claims. These can be costly and time-consuming. For common pitfalls, we might have issues if there are unresolved utility relocations or conflicts. For example, make sure utility poles and signal designs are not in conflict. When developing and updating the schedule, deliverable deadlines are backed off to the let date rather than the PS&E turn-in date. That can be a real issue if we're all looking at the let date and backing off when we need to do our tasks and activities. We need to be more focused on that PS&E turn-in date. Another issue could be if we're reviewing and completing reviews independently rather than having multidisciplinary reviews. It's very important to identify and address these conflicts early, so multidisciplinary reviews help us do that. Forgetting that every project needs a rail cert. Not completing a construction consultation if we need one, and necessary permits are not approved. Or I think one of the big ones, which I don't have listed on here, is if we're not coordinating well. So I'm going to wrap up with some key considerations. Design with construction in mind. Make sure that the plans will make sense to the contractor as well as to our construction staff. Plans should be consistent across each section and should not have any fatal flaws. Also, all key documents should be turned in and align with those plans. Does your project need a mandatory pre-bid meeting? Make sure you know when you might need one or when it's beneficial for your project to have one. Is a 15-month construction estimate update on your project schedule. This estimate update helps ensure that the appropriate level of construction funds are requested. This also is needed to make sure your project gets on the 12-month let list. Will the project benefit from or need an intermediate contract time, also known as an ICT, or delayed date of availability? Consider these ICTs when developing phasing for maintenance of traffic. And also you can consider some time-related incentives or disincentives, like, for example, liquidated damages when it is helpful to minimize traffic delays. Also, if your project needs an 8-week advertisement, you should know that. You can check SAP, it usually tells you if you need one of those. That will require your PS&E package to be turned in 4 months prior to let rather than 3 months. So before I turn it back over to Brian, I'll leave you with this. Delivering projects is not easy, but if we accept the challenge and we work together and prioritize delivering complete and accurate projects, we'll be successful. Take it away.
All right. Stage 4 rail coordination. I say this jokingly, but hopefully it is. What rail coordination? It's hopefully that the agreements have been signed, permits have been filed, and you do have your rail certification. So again, early coordination and railroad involvement is key. Hopefully at this stage, like I said, agreements are in place. So, but if there's things that do come up, and knowing the railroad, there always is, we're here to help, as always. So feel free to reach out. We've also incorporated some, hopefully these presentations will be shared with y'all. We've incorporated some links into this presentation for y'all to look at with these different guides that are available to us. And with that, we will open it up to questions. We have about 4 minutes. So we used our time effectively. They used their time effectively. Any questions? I see one right there. You want to stand up?
It's a real question, actually.
Figures.
If a project comes very close to encroaching onto a rail, but doesn't actually touch rail or rail right of way, do we still need to coordinate?
Yes. Yes. If it comes within a reasonable distance, you do need to give them what we call as a cursor review. So that PE, setting up preliminary engineering with them and doing a cursor review through that process.
And I have a follow-up question. I know many projects don't have any kind of rail encroachments. How does that rail certification process work when there are no encroachments? Is it just...
So all projects should be, when the projects are initially scoped, when the scoping letters are sent out, Rail Division should be getting those. And that is when we look at the project and see that there are no railroad impacts, and we just note that. But it'll be up to the project managers to, when that project is about to be let, to let the Rail Division know we need a rail certification on that particular project. Bo?
That cursory review,
Yes.
should we extend that to the utilities, particularly if we're building them?
You should. Yes. Any impacts that are potential impacts.
Yeah, if we're trying to stop short, we should still let them see that we
Yes.
have indeed stopped
Yes.
short.
Yes. Any other questions?
Do you coordinate that for us?
We certainly can. We certainly can. Any other questions? We do appreciate your all's attention, and y'all have a good day.
I threw you off. I know I did. Hey, everybody. We're going to take a 30-minute break, and then we're going to come back with advances in right-of-way data management and cost estimates.